feel a little like a 3-year-old who's just been invited into the cutlery drawer. I have an aunt who died over the summer. She was a Dominican sister, one of 3 nuns among my father's siblings. She adored puns and corny jokes. She loved to sing and dance, at least until she had knee replacement surgery a few years ago that didn't exactly go right. I never saw anything resembling a halo around her head, but she did radiate a kind of warmth and grace that I tend to associate with people that I consider to be holy people. She had a recurrence of breast cancer a little more than a year ago, and she made a decision that she wasn't going to have any further treatment. I'm convinced that she's one of the people we celebrate today as we set aside this holy day of obligation, or as we call it here, a holy day of opportunity to commemorate our saints. Just about a year ago, Ginny and I were on the East Coast visiting our son Jack at school, and we took a day trip in our rental car down to see my aunt and her sister, who also lived in the Dominican Mother House in Spark Hill, New York, just off the Hudson River. My aunt was in pretty good shape then, but we all knew she was going to die relatively soon, and she knew it too. And for some reason, I'm not sure why, she'd gone through her things, and she got a little envelope, this envelope as a matter of fact, prop homilies they call these, but I think she wanted to leave something to me that she thought was important. So in this envelope are a few Xerox copies of some religious writers that were important to her. And then we also have a bunch of these little holy cards that you get at the funeral parlor. And these are cards from the funerals of aunts and uncles, my grandmother, my grandfather, man I never met. He died in 1944 when my aunt was 9. My dad was only 11 then. My first thought was, this is really an odd thing to give me. My second thought was, what the heck am I going to do with these things? I mean, when somebody's been hanging on to something since 1944, you can't just sort of stealthily drop it in the trash on your way out the door. So when we were getting ready to leave, I said something like, I guess I won't be seeing you again anytime soon. And she smiled and said, probably not. Maybe at the Last Judgment. And then we laughed, and we headed away. I still have the cards, still haven't figured out what to do with them. They are kind of like a little collection of family saints for me, though. These are people that, who knows, I may meet again someday, or perhaps meet them for the first time in the case of my grandfather. I think what that will be like is sort of what we heard in today's first reading from the book of Revelation. A multitude which no one could count, from every nation, race, people, and tongue, the people who've washed their garments white in the blood of the Lamb. So today on the Feast of All Saints, tomorrow All Souls Day, we remember those people who've moved beyond death. I remember those people on the funeral cards. This book of remembrance here has the names of loved ones that we've all written in, people who've died, people who just might be saints. But you know, when you get right down to it, I'm not sure that you have to be dead to be a saint. When we talk about the communion of saints, what the church means is all of us, both those on this side of the grave and those who've gone before us. And if we define a saint as one who is with God, well, God is certainly present here, now. Perhaps we'll be more aware of God's presence in the next life, but the fact that our antennas aren't quite as good on this side of the grave doesn't mean that we're not with God today, now. St. Paul certainly didn't think you had to be dead to be a saint. In his letters to the first Christian communities, he frequently addressed the people as saints. Just this morning in the Liturgy of the Hours, the prayers that priests and nuns say every day, there was a prayer that said, "Today we rejoice in the holy men and women of every place and time." Today's a time. This definitely is a place. I'm thinking there might be some saints here. But if you don't have to be dead to be a saint, well, what do you have to be? For that, I go to one of my go-to guys, the mystic and monk Thomas Merton, who wrote in his book, New Seeds of Contemplation, to be a saint means to be myself. To be a saint means to be myself. Now, I don't think Merton meant sitting on the couch, channel surfing with some pork rinds self. I think that maybe for Merton, sanctity was something different than that. Now, when I think about who myself is, and I think about how I judge people sometimes and how I'm cranky other times and the thoughts that go through my head that never manage even to come out my mouth, I think the idea of myself being a saint is kind of crazy. But Merton says he needs to be himself, and he's talking about something he calls his true self, because he continues with this: the problem of sanctity and salvation is the problem of finding out who I am and discovering my true self. And I'm betting that discovery doesn't take more than a lifetime. It probably requires some special graces from God, too. My true self is not the guy who judges others or gets kind of ragey on the roads every now and then. Underneath anger and sinfulness and the other garbage that litters life, there's something else, something more. And the church teaches, way back in the book of Genesis, that we're all made in the image and likeness of God. In other words, we're made good and holy, saintly even. In fact, that's who we truly are. Our truest selves are made in the image and likeness of God. And I trust that when we fall short, God sees through the other stuff and focuses on the good part. The problem isn't that we don't have a good part. The problem is we're not aware of the good part, the part that's made in God's image and likeness. And if we do see it, we don't always choose it. More from Merton now, sorry. God leaves us free to be whatever we like. We can be ourselves or not as we please. We may be true or false. The choice is ours. So I think perhaps the road to sainthood involves a couple of really important steps. The first is recognizing the difference between our actions, which aren't always good, and ourselves, which are, so that we can learn what we are underneath the sinfulness and detritus that the world heaps on us and that we contribute to ourselves. And the second step involves making a choice and choosing to be the person that God created, our true self. Now, I think my aunt might be a saint because she understood she could give glory to God by being who she was, bad jokes and all. Her singing and dancing were part of that. My aunt even trusted in God and her true self when deciding that staying alive just to be alive a little longer probably wasn't worth the pain. I think she believed deep in her heart that a part of her already was connected to God, the same way we believe that our saints are connected to God. In the gospel today, Jesus promises to live with us and love us as our true selves, ourselves that are poor in spirit and meek. I'm pretty sure that sometimes we actually are merciful. Most of the time we probably just aspire to that. But Jesus meets us in those places, encountering the meek and the poor in spirit where they are, and he tells us that we're blessed. Helps us drill down beneath our failings and insecurities to see what he sees and what I expect he delights in. The second reading today is the key. St. John says, we are God's children now. Doesn't say we will be God's children someday when we get our collective act together. St. John says we're children of God now, today. We're already there, if only we have the grace to recognize it. So I tend to think that today not only should we celebrate Mary and Joseph and Peter and Paul and Francis and Dominic and at least one Dominican sister that I know of, and all those people on the funeral cards that are in our houses and on the book that's in our sanctuary, but maybe we could just spend a moment celebrating ourselves too, our true selves, the parts of us that God recognizes through all the detours the world throws at us and all the roadblocks that we set up ourselves. I think if we can make that true self a part of our foundation, we might actually be counted among the saints, now and at the hour of our death.